The burning question for us, because we want to do the right thing, and that means for us working with CDCR too, is what thought have you given to alternatives to solitary confinement? If you have any thoughts,
Well, one of the thoughts, and I would love to speak with CDC too with some of my thoughts. As a matter of fact, I tried to get
fine.
through
We could arrange all that.
Okay. Yeah. Well, some of the thoughts. There's a severe, the sensory deprivation, the dehumanization, bringing the aspect of humanity back. I took my grandbabies to go see my son, and they were 3 and 2 years old. And the 3-year-old, JJ, the second day we were being driven in the van, and he kept saying, "Why is he in a box?" And so the second day he was looking at the tubes behind the prison, and he said, they put my Uncle Johnny in the pipes, and they put him in the box. And I said, well, how do they get him in the pipes? He goes, they fold him. Just in that 3-year-old mind, of the cartoon-like trying to figure this out. But one of the things is, why should he not be able to hug his uncle? The family members who we represent, why should we not be able to hug our loved ones? The special needs yard, visiting is closed once a month for the special needs yard, and that's where they house the debriefers and the child rapists and pedophiles. And on this yard, they get visiting contact all day, 8 hours, for this yard. So if you can close it down once a weekend for this yard, why can't you close visiting so that only those in administrative segregation and special housing unit can begin to have some form of implementing contact visits, implementing, human contact. That's not dealing with the thousands that do not get visits, though, but that's just like one suggestion that I've envisioned, because CDC themselves has said that visiting is sacred ground. Nothing happens in there. They don't, fight or anything.
Right. Thank you.
Hello? I just wanted to say, as a solution, an emergency legislative dictate, or whatever they're called, that anybody in long-term solitary confinement immediately be granted physical access to their families. So I went all those years without touching anybody, and I've been with my partner for over 7 years, and it took 5 years before she could touch me without it hurting my skin. So that's, and then oversight, a person or a small team of people to work out of Pelican Bay and report to this committee that has nothing to do with the CDC or the Inspector General's office, that interviews allegations in a responsible and in an accountable way. And because I wrote 602s when I was in prison. You could write one a week. I wrote one a week for 2 years about the food, and it was laughable. There's this joke in the CDC. It's called 602 it, and it's usually perpetrated by the guards. So if something happens that's unjust, the guards just say 602 it. It's a joke, and this is their administrative remedy. This is their so just not to take up any more time, except to say phone calls for anybody in solitary confinement, phone calls to family members immediately, and visits, and get these human beings. We are defined by this idea of human being. We are a group, and we need people, and the one thing that makes us people is other people. So saying that a person is not confined because they're in a cell with another person who's being confined, but they can't see their child. Like, this program is ripping communities apart. It's tearing families apart.
Mr. Nutt.
My suggestion would be that absolutely do away with long-term solitary confinement. And if you got to place people in that situation, to set a limit, an identifiable limit, 30 days at the max, that they could serve in there. You shouldn't be, even when you was designing Pelican Bay, I think the architects only imagined people being there for 18 months, less alone decades. And I think probably the longest held person in solitary confinement in California is Hugo Pinnell, and he's been there, I think, 42 years, and he doesn't have a murder. So at a certain point, when I say I know them to be the bullies, is that once you spit on a guard or you cross that line, they will reap havoc in such a way that they terrorize whole populations of people. And I think that it leaves them scarred when they come home. In addition to everything that's been suggested, I suggest that that the oversight not rest within, again, CDCR or the Inspector General. I think that somebody that's responsible to the legislature should have oversight of the California Department of Corrections. And probably here's one of the strangest requests, is that y'all do some reform about who gets to contribute to campaigns. You know, I don't mean to step on y'all toes, because some of this stuff is driven by my inhumanity. The way that people look at me, in part, is shaped by probably parallels the contribution they make to candidates in a real way. So unless you stop the Correctional Guard Association from making massive donations to a whole bunch of people, I don't know if I have any salvation. And I suggest that you actually look, when you're in this crisis, and Jerry Brown is getting ready to actually send people out of state and actually introduce private prisons to the state, to see if he's getting any of that money from private prison makers. So like at a certain point, where y'all allowed to actually feed for money could have a lot to do with them not recognizing my humanity.
All right, sir. Thank you all very much. I'm going to turn this over to my co-chair now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I actually have some questions.
I'm still here. I'm down
Sorry,
with you.
Not so fast. You guys are actually, you're talking to some of the public financing crowd here. Tried to do that. But Mr. Cooley hasn't been here long enough, but we'll talk to you too. I do have a couple of questions. First, and comments. Ms. Canales, I would be very interested in your research. You said that you looked at some things and had some incidences and case histories.
Yes.
I learn a lot through talking to people and getting case histories.
Yes, I do. I have actual chronos and documentation showing that these individuals were going to their committee reviews, and it was being said, you know, inactive gang status, but yet they continued to be detained because their only way out was if they chose to make statements against another prisoner. A lot of these prisoners, if they've been in there over a decade, and if they don't have phone calls, a lot of them don't even get visits, and their mail is scrutinized. A lot of their argument is, what information could I possibly have to tell you that, you know, there's nothing to provide? I've been isolated. So we have built up quite a collection of these type of documents. I didn't want to overburden you and bring it all, but I would love to fax it to you.
I think we're committed to this discussion.
Okay.
For the long haul at this point. So
okay, and even the documentation most recent, they're still getting the 115s for the drawings, you know, the Aztec art or the books, you know, the political expression, things like that. But these are allowable items into the prison, probably because if they try to stop it and these prisoners put forth litigation, they would be defeated. So they allow it into the prison. Then once it's in the prison, they do write them up, serious documentation.
You know, thank you. I would also like to know how to access the YouTube that
I
you
would love to
referred
give that to you
because I've never heard of that
very,
until today.
I think that's
And
been
I'd be
one of the most
interested in-
hardest things, is to see those videos of these prisoners and making these statements, making blanket statements, you know, that he guarantees that all the money on their account is from organized crime. And I showed my church group because they help my son a lot. And, you know, and I guarantee him he could audit my son's account. And they don't give us that voice in you know, back to him, though.
Okay. You know, thank you for
Can
that.
I ask y'all one question before I leave?
Yeah.
I don't think that there are some of us that meet success. Nobody ever asked us, upon the completion of all the torture, what made us successful. it was like nobody cared that we somehow endured the gauntlet and came out the other end. You know, they report to every piece of failure that they can find to talk about us, but nobody pointed to, nobody ever interviewed me at the end of parole and asked for exit strategy. They didn't even think about that I was going anywhere. I guess they didn't have any faith. The other thing that I would suggest is that in all of these institutions that they introduce ethnic studies, because these people are going to return back to their communities and actually need to actually live with other folks. And I think that right there could be helpful if they would just introduce something simple like that to make them appreciate other human beings and appreciate their culture and their history. So
I thank you for that. Actually, you anticipated a question that I was going to have for you and Mr. Sisfra. And it may be too long to answer now. It probably is. But what I ask many of the people that are formerly incarcerated that I talk with is, what made you decide you were going to survive in another way? Was it a person, a book, an experience, whatever? What was it? And what programs supported and mattered to you when you got out? Because those are the things that we need to replicate and we need to understand better. You're exactly right. How do you build on the resilience that some of you had in spite of everything that you had to deal with, so that we can find another path? So I hope very much that we'll have more conversations and that we can share some of that. I do have a kind of hard question that I would want to ask you, however, and that is, I believe, I'm stating it accurately, I may not be, but I believe I am, that CDCR would say that there are violent prison gangs and that a number of people in the SHU, possibly 10%, which would be about 250 individuals, are in fact smuggling drugs, hit lists, and other things in and out of prison, in their body cavities, in code that they may talk with on the phone or whatever. And I am interested in what your experience of that is, because that is some subset of people that do have to be dealt with seriously if they're going to hurt other people on the outside.
For me, I would care to venture probably a cell phone costs about $500 in prison right now. That's something that you can't stick up your rectum. So maybe when you get to the point of really having oversight of the monster, maybe we can actually look at how much contraband is being introduced by staff, because at a certain point, it comes across as insulting that a lot of stuff that happened in prison, they immediately look to our family members as if they actually dictate that, and they very seldom look among their own ranks. And I think that the cell phone situation in prison is the clearest example, where it's almost impossible to get it through a metal detector. It's almost impossible to shove it up your keister to get it introduced into a prison setting. So I would suggest that you look among the staff in terms of contraband and them controlling markets inside of institutions, for one, and their involvement in that stuff. For two, when they say that there are violent prison gangs, make them prove it, because like the statistics that you just heard tonight, a lot of people are in the hole for simply being labeled as a member of a gang. Most people in the hole probably haven't had a behavior infraction in years, but yet they label you in such a way. The first time I ever heard them use the term the worst of the worst was associated with the Madrid case. Out of that case, and what sit at the center of that case, I think it was 20 years ago or thereabouts, was a person who had been driven insane and began to smear feces on himself. And they scalded him damn near to death. His name was Von Dirch, and he was a car thief. So when y'all sling that term around, or when they sling that term around, the worst of the worst, somehow y'all got to debunk that we're not human, and they're not saying that stuff to generate profit and a whole bunch of other stuff, because the worst of the worst possibly could be people who are profiting on a daily basis off of my misery. So.
I don't know if there are any other comments, but
My little thing came off. I wanted to talk about you talked about what worked, and well, first of all, I had a date. Now I found out why this is on there.
I'll just leave it off.
First of all, I had a date, so I had hope. I knew I was getting out. I knew I was going to get out, and so I had something to work towards. I have done things in my life that are worse than the things that the people who are doing life today. A friend of mine, Jed Miller, is serving 20 years on a life sentence for stealing a car, and so I was getting out, and I knew that I was working towards something. But many of these people aren't getting out, most or many, and so the absence of hope is despair. So what does a person in despair do for themselves to care for themselves? And how long can you keep that up? So I think we need to give these people hope. Give them light at the end of the tunnel. Put an absolute cap. 5 years, fine. Let's say 5 years, right? Let's say, okay, devil's advocate, right? That these people are gang members and they're doing everything we're saying they're doing, right? Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right wing, nutcase rhetoric. Let's say that's true. We know that it's not working. It's still not working. So, what's happening is indefensible. We're speaking to stuff that's indefensible, and even if everything they're saying is not true, the CDC admitted recently that they believe that the hunger strike was orchestrated by the people in Pelican Bay as a gang action. How does that support the presence of Pelican Bay? That means we're spinning our wheels and we're hurting people in the process. And it's not working, and we're harming people, and this program is enfolding many thousands and thousands and thousands of people. Every single one of California's 30-plus prisons has over 200 people in solitary confinement, plus the 4,000+ we talked about. They're in the tens of thousands. Every single California authority, every one of these facilities has a long-term solitary confinement, and it doesn't work. Sorry.
Okay. And another thing I'd like to address is if these prisoners, before entering the prison, they had a drug problem, maybe they go in for carjacking or burglary or whatever theft charges, and they enter our prison system, and then the prison system says these are, gang affiliates, gang members, involved in gang activity, and this is all going within the prison. Isn't it time to start asking ourselves, are so many jails and prisons really the solution if this all seems to be taking place within the prison system? It's such a bigger picture, and I know it's way past the solitary confinement issue, but there's a lot that goes on inside just with the automatic labeling of what city they go into the prison from. If they get off of a bus from the Orange County Jail, they will immediately be labeled a Southern Hispanic. The same thing if they get off of a bus from Visalia, they will immediately be labeled a Northern. That's the whole system and the way it goes. I did a presentation with one guy, and he said he kept telling him, I'm just a white guy from the beach with a drug problem. So they intentionally said, go in that cell, and it was full of blacks. This was before the end all hostilities. So then he did go in the white cell. But a lot of it has to go, it starts from the minute you enter the prison system.
Hey, I got to tell you one other thing. My daughter, I made a couple promises when I was in prison. One, that I would walk my daughter down the aisle when she got ready to get married. So I guess the thing that I think is the most underutilized resource that you have is probably all of those people out there. My family pulled me through. When I didn't have any hope, my family pulled me through. So I need to say, if there's anything that I can actually have to offer, it was like I used to tell my daughter that I was in San Quentin, that I was in Disneyland because y'all painted it all those weird colors. And one day she came and told me after she learned how to read that I was in prison. Then I started promising her. And that promise right there took me through from being an illiterate through college. And it took me out the gates until I was able to walk my daughter down the aisle. So I guess the strongest remedy to a lot of stuff they did to me was love, because that got me through. The hatred, the tear gas, the beatings, getting shot, and being poisoned didn't do anything but piss me off.
Well, thank you for that. And really, we appreciate the candid comments of everybody. I want to say that I would like from CDCR some more information about having disciplinary action for the hunger strikers. That appears it's something I think that legislators are going to want to know more about, because that's an odd thing, and it usually, in other instances where I've seen things like that, it has led to increased hostilities, not better understanding. And also the business of debriefing. It seems to me that's a strange concept. And no, that we need to really, if it becomes a condition for getting out of SHU, there's so many opportunities for corruption in that kind of testimony that we need to look at it. And no, you guys, one of our rules, you know this, we haven't been obeying, is that, silence in the courtroom, etc. Is I do think we need to look at the authority and training of our correctional staff. Because one of the things that's most, we didn't ever talk about the impact on the guards of the absolute power they may have over incarcerated people. And unfortunately, and the lack of an outside advisor when you're going through these hearings that put you in SHU. And I think our experience throughout history with many, many populations in many, many places is that absolute power over other people tends to corrupt. And it corrupts some legislators. They get arrogant. It corrupts people in bureaucracies sometimes that don't give people a fair hearing. It corrupts people in many, many ways. And how do we train and work with the correctional staff, and how we make sure that there are many checks and balances that our Constitution gives people in other ways. It seems to me that we could work together to do this, and that all of this, I want to assure you, is going to be on the agenda for the coming months. We have just begun to do our work. And we want to end up, as many people have said, with a prison system that is the best and most rehabilitative in the nation. And we're going to have quite a way to go to get there, and we're going to need all of us working together to get there.